Hello, everybody. Welcome. Starting to see some people rolling in here. So glad to have you. Thanks everybody, and welcome to the 2024 Hyperspace Challenge webinar series. My name is Kelly Stafford. I am the Senior Program Manager. And then I'm joined with a really great cast of characters here. We've got TJ, who's going to be our moderator, John, Nick, and Jonathan, who are all VCs in the field of space. So, well, actually, I'm sorry, Nick is with Long Capture, and he's well, I'll let them introduce themselves, but this is our webinar series, and this is part of an ongoing series hosted by the Hyperspace Challenge, the Air Force Research Lab, and the U.S. Space Force to strengthen the connective tissue between diverse communities within the space industry. The goal of today's event is just to dive into, some of that government contracting. What do VCs look for when they're trying to make their decisions as it relates to government contracting? So where are the, the government signals? How does that, influence their decisions on what they decide to ultimately invest in? Thanks so much to the panel, and thanks TJ for moderating, and I'm going to pass it over to you now to take it away.
All right. Hello, everybody. Once again, my name is TJ Cook. I'm the fund manager for Ingenuity Venture Fund. We'll go around the horn here and say hi to everybody else on this webinar. But what we're doing here is talking investment, talking all things investment in a way that's helpful to entrepreneurs who are trying to build something now, grow something, and as part of that, get investment, right? I'll repeat myself a little bit after we do some introductions as people roll in to the webinar, but I will say that we did this back on February 8th. February 8th, we talked the Entrepreneur's Guide to Space Investing, and we really focused on the mind of VCs, what's happening with overall investing trends in space technologies and adjacencies and deep tech, and what that means for us as investors and how we're thinking about our thesis, our convictions, things like that. If you missed that, they'll put in the, yep, Annie already put it in there, the link to that webinar. I'm not tooting our horn. I'm not blaming myself, but lots of people reported that was really helpful to them. Just kind of the way we're thinking about things and the way we talked about it was good. In this webinar, what we're going to do is a little TikTok. So there's VC funding that can help extend one's runway to build what you want to build, to get traction in the marketplace. There's also, in this domain, especially government funding. And so we're going to focus a little bit more on government funding, but through that investing and entrepreneur lane, right? In a way that's helpful for you and how VCs are thinking about government funding vis-a-vis their portfolios, what kind of startups they're looking to fund. And I hope you get some insights about government funding opportunities specifically, maybe ones that are already on your radar and you get a unique insight about that, or ones that you haven't heard of that you should. So with me today is the one, the only John Richmond from Lockheed Martin Ventures. I'll just say your name and where you're from. Nick Hale, is it Hale or Heil? Heil from Long Capture. If you were with us February 8th, we had Nick Snowd from Marlinspike Ventures. He had to be out of pocket, and he recommended Nick Heil, which we're really happy to have from Long Capture, because Long Capture is specifically focused on capturing those government contracts for their clients. So he's going to have a really great perspective for us today. And then our special guest, the man, the myth, the legend, Jonathan Lacoste with Space VC is with us. So let's go around the room here. Start with you, John. Just introduce yourself, the company, you kind of need no introduction, but do it anyway.
Hey, thanks, TJ. That was really generous. John Richmond. I'm a senior investment associate at Lockheed Martin Ventures. I do our equity investments on behalf of Lockheed Martin's space business area, as well as our missile and fire control business area. Former active duty Air Force officer for 12.5 years. I'm a reservist at the Defense Innovation Unit part-time, but full-time here with Lockheed. In Lockheed Ventures, briefly, we invest in dual-use deep tech startups that are synergistic with what the corporation is trying to achieve. So in this case, space, or our missile and fire control business area. We have 14 technology verticals that we invest across, and I'll be able to tell a little bit more about the fund, but that's probably a good place to start. Thanks, TJ.
Thanks, John. Nick, introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, my name is Nick Kyle. I'm the innovation strategist over at Long Capture. I do a lot of business development work for a lot of small businesses that are looking to start working with the DoD. So Long Capture's mission is to lower the barriers of entry and help break into the DoD for small businesses and help them find pathways to start scaling their technologies. So my role is really focused on finding the right programs, program officers, different PMs, project managers, whatever it may be, that are leading projects that are doing the RDT&E type work, or like working with the research labs to help them find the place where their technologies fit the best and where there's government funding in place that they can try to capture to continue developing their technology to fit a defense-specific use case. So we're really trying to guide our clients through the capture piece, through the business development piece, and help them write proposals. So that's kind of where my background and discussion points will come in from.
Fantastic, Nick. Again, great to have you here. Thanks for subbing in last minute, just being a great sport. And Jonathan, please introduce yourself.
Morning, everyone. Great to meet you, and thanks for being here. My name is Jonathan Lacoste, founder and general partner at a venture capital firm called Space VC. As the name suggests, we do invest in space and defense tech companies. We focus on early stage, so pre-seed and seed, writing checks up to $1 million in startups. We've deployed about $50 million into the space and defense sector over the last few years, and we have 17 portfolio companies, and looking forward to discussing some of those today.
Great. And Jonathan, if you'll humor me as our esteemed guest just for a little bit, talk a little bit about your check size, some of the fundamentals about what kind of companies you're looking for, check size, all that good stuff, what you don't invest in, anything like that. That would be good for those who maybe can't last the full hour with us.
Yeah. Look, we describe ourselves as a day zero investor. So what that means is we are comfortable going very early. So oftentimes we're investing at PowerPoint stage, pre-product, pre-revenue, a couple of founders bouncing around an idea, going through the idea maze, trying to figure out exactly the direction and thrust of business. And we're very comfortable being the first 500,000 or $1 million on the cap table. So we've partnered with a number of our companies in that way. Generally speaking, the short version of what we're looking for, we tend to be investors that are looking for technology that can be commercializable in a shorter period of time, whether through government or commercial customers. So what that means is we are less likely to get excited and lean in on companies that have a 4 to 5 year R&D period or deep scientific risk that they're looking to take. Generally speaking, venture capital is a better financing partner for companies that are ready to have some sense of thrust of scale more quickly in short term. So that's what we tend to do. We're comfortable investing by ourselves and can be the first check in a business. We oftentimes invest with other great firms, whether it's John at Lockheed Ventures or whether it's some of the larger venture capital firms that are now investing in space and defense as well.
That's super helpful. People are furiously writing down your details if they didn't already have them because they said day zero, PowerPoint. That's me. Let's do this. So Jonathan's here for y'all. And even if we investors say no, it usually comes with some good insights or some rationale that's going to be helpful. And I think that's what this community is all about. Once again, thank you. I'm TJ Cook. I helped design and start Hyperspace Challenge back in 2018, working with the estimable Matt Fetro and Gabe Mounts at AFRL Tech Engagement Office here in beautiful Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I am the fund manager for Ingenuity Venture Fund. we are forming our next fund, which will have a specific focus on space technologies. So being able to host and moderate this webinar is really an honor, because it helps me get to know some peers in the ecosystem, but also get insights just like you all on the trends. This is a difficult domain to track and stay on top of. Another partner that's here in the ecosystem locally, New Space, just got the Sadler report reattached to New Space Nexus, and I'm getting like 4 emails a day, and they're like 50 pages long each one, but I feel like I need to read it because so much is happening, right? I'm sure you all feel the same way. I see some familiar faces on the attendees list. Here's what we're going to do. The 4 of us are going to have a conversation for a little while. I'll remind you that on February 8th of this year, we had a webinar specific to what's happening in VC land. What are the trends? What's the data coming out? Where's funding going up? Where's funding going down, et cetera. On this webinar, we're going to focus a little bit more on the government side. What's the government thinking? What's the government funding? What are they announcing? And how does that affect us as investors? And of course, by extension, you as founders, entrepreneurs who are building something and who need funding to build that something, whether you get it from the government or from a VC investment like Jonathan's day zero $1 million check. So, yes, Ricardo, the Sadler report is a little overwhelming. He needs a chat GPT and like, hey, help me summarize this, but it's good stuff. And there's lots of good sources for information. That's actually going to be a question I ask our panelists here in a little bit is, what are you reading? What are your sources? What do you like? But before we get there, let's go ahead and dive in with my first question. Last thing I'll mention is, be putting stuff in Q&A. Q&A is a lot easier for me to track than putting a question in chat. So again, go to the Q&A function, pop in a question, and then by 10:30, 10:35 Mountain Time, I'll get to those and we'll just start interacting with your all's questions. So, gentlemen, last time we talked about VC data and priorities. Let's talk government funding data and priorities. What's your take on the 2025 Space Force strategy, the budget? Any surprises? Any insights that are informing the way you're thinking about your investment thesis, your convictions, and in Nick Howe's case, the way you're helping clients? So maybe Nick, we'll start with you. This is your job, right, to track what's coming down the pike. So start there. What are you seeing that will be helpful for our entrepreneurs in the audience?
Yeah, so doing an initial review of the Space Force budget for FY25, it's a little bit lower than the FY24 budget, about 2% lower. It is about 2% higher than what was actually appropriated. So kind of right in the middle there. But it was interesting to see that the Space Force is starting to level out a little bit. They've been growing the last few years. They're a brand new department. They're growing, and now it's starting to level out a little more. Their RDT&E is slowing down a little bit. So the priorities for the Space Force are starting to change a little bit. And then, sounds like some of those decreases in the budget are coming from reducing the number of launches due to the reduced number of available technologies and payloads to launch. So I don't know if that's industry having trouble keeping up or if what's going on there, but that was one thing that kind of caught my eye, was that Space Force is reducing the number of launches they're doing due to the available product to, launch into space. So that was one that kind of caught my eye, in addition to seeing that they're trying to reduce the number of large satellites and increase or replace that with a more proliferated approach where they're trying to have a lot more small satellites. That was pretty appealing to me because that allows the government to move a little bit faster when you're doing any kind of changes. There's more resiliency. As we try to compete in mass, that's a much better approach. And looking at those types of ways that the government is trying to look at the great power competition that we're in and try to, combat that. And as we try to be innovative, as we try to modify technologies and integrate new technologies, the smaller, faster moving purchases that we can do allow for smaller, easier changes rather than having one large system that takes 10 years to develop. And, if you want to make a change to that, it costs years and millions of dollars and, put something over budget and beyond the timeline that was originally introduced. So those are kind of my high level approaches. I'll pass it over to John and Jonathan and maybe jump in with a few extra comments.
All right, yeah, I'll jump in. So we look at it kind of more macro perspective and look at trends and how it's going to affect our overall portfolio. And what I'm in particular looking for is the DoD increasing the overall amount of funding that goes to the Space Force, or are they reprogramming it from other services? In the past years, they've pulled funds from other services to fund the Space Force. It made sense. They're standing up a new force and they're moving, personnel and assets under the Space Force. And so, I'm still not seeing a large jump in new funds that aren't actually being taken from elsewhere. So it's saying that, obviously there's a lot of funds going to it. I think 29 billion proposed for 25, but not an increase there. So looking at that, it tells me it's a little bit slow on the government side. And the other thing I look at is how does the DoD's budget compare to the other space acquiring organizations, so the intelligence community, say DIU, which is under the DoD, but others that will put budget against space. And I'm seeing that multiple agencies are procuring similar types of capabilities. The NRO has a strategic focus, where the DoD has a more operational and tactical focus, but the types of things that they're buying can be used for both. So I think we'll see that certain vendors their contracts will be plussed up to tackle multiple levels of mission. So yeah, those are a couple initial takeaways.
Yeah, and just to add to what John was saying, and certainly what Nick was saying as well, I think we view Space Force as certainly one of the larger, if not the largest, pockets for startups to obviously procure funding and non-dilutive capital from, but not the exclusive opportunity set. We have a lot of startups that certainly are pitching DIU with their much larger role now reporting directly to the Secretary of Defense for innovation dollars and kind of bridging, the valley of death early on in their journey. NRO and NGA, certainly for the geospatial community and Earth observation oriented intelligence gathering space constellations are, there's a bit of an internal fight right now between those organizations in terms of where that budget sits. But regardless of where it sits, that certainly has been a pocket of funding for space startups. The other one I would point to is, and I'm sure we'll get more into this, TJ, is the general shift of Space Force continuing to lead on commercial capabilities for things that typically have been owned, operated, and built by government or a handful of contractors. And so certainly SATCOM and PNT and cyberspace and space domain awareness are all kind of historically been owned, operated by Space Force, but continuing to leverage commercial capabilities. And the reason I bring that up is because other services, other branches will certainly leverage those capabilities as well, and will go out and procure those for their own environment. So what we see today in Ukraine in terms of GPS jamming and spoofing, obviously, the need for resilient PNT and location for precision guided munition, or for drone autonomy, or other types of projectiles. Certainly, Space Force has an important role and an invisible backbone there to play, but services are also procuring and funding their own innovative solutions there as well. So I think as a space company, the net here is Space Force obviously has the largest and most interesting budget for space domain technologies, but not exclusive within the DoD.
Yeah, that I'm reminded of a 2018 relationship that Hyperspace Challenge ended up spurring with there was an Air Force person who was in charge of maintenance of 1 million square foot of Air Force facilities around the globe, and then there's an Army person. Guess what? Army also has buildings, and both of them actually came to Hyperspace Challenge thinking, how do we get away from clipboards and Excel spreadsheets to track rooftop maintenance issues and things like that? So a little bit of a mundane problem, not like gas stations in space awesomeness, but the fact is that the company came in thinking about a space specific use case for their, in this case, geospatial data intelligence platform, and they found a contract with the Army before a contract with space. So that's has been and will continue to be, I think, the creative discipline of your team's founders is to think about this core capability. Who needs this, right? And right now, the Space Force and the way the wind blows and different things like that, when the market hits and when it doesn't, it might mean that Space Force budget isn't what's going to demand that, but there might be a terrestrial application. You know, goes back to the dual use thought here. Who needs this capability now to solve a pain point now? That gets you a foot in the door, grows your product excellence for that eventual day when, yeah, you want to be flying that component on 1,000 different satellites any given day. So that's always a good takeaway from conversations like this. Nick, I wanted to go back. You had a kind of passing comment around, you know, little shifts in priorities that you're seeing. Do you want to go into that a little bit more, like especially from the vantage point of our entrepreneurs on the call? Are you seeing shifts away from capability X and towards capability Y? This is where I'll bring up, you know, 21 minutes into the webinar. The AI buzzword right now is like, are you seeing any, from your reading of budgets and your reading of opportunities, any kind of thing trending up or down in terms of what our entrepreneurs should be thinking for or positioning their technologies around?
Yeah, and I think that kind of plays pretty well into the discussion we just had. So, you know, Jonathan mentioned Space Force isn't the only department to focus on for space-related technologies. So I was reviewing the FY25 science and technology budget and priorities, and right now the Space Force has about 5% of the budget for the S&T, but the space critical technology area. So the Office of Secretary of Defense for Research and Engineering has identified 14 different critical technology areas. Space is one of those 14, and space is the #2 science and technology critical technology area out of the other 14, only trailing trusted autonomy and AI. So while the Space Force has about 5% of the budget, space as a critical technology area is a pretty big priority across the DoD as a whole. So looking at other organizations, Space Force is probably always going to be your first stop, but it's absolutely worth exploring, the NGAs, the NROs, and even the Army and Navy. Are you doing terrestrial targeting that the Army could use? Are you doing maritime domain, vessel tracking that the Navy could use? So looking at the other departments just to see who else is investing in space and what type of capabilities and technologies they're looking for. And then one thing that I do to just kind of see where I think the Space Force is investing their money is look at where the SBIR dollars are going. So if you check out where those are going, where the primary funding is being allocated to different technology areas. Obviously in SpaceWorks, space is very high on that list. But SpaceWorks has also been focusing on changing up their SBIR approach a little bit. So AFWorks and AFVentures and SpaceWorks, they have the open topics where anybody can come submit anything. But SpaceWorks has been getting a little more strategic, and they've been releasing more challenges. And they've had a digital spaceport of the future challenge. They've had an alternate position navigation timing challenge, and they've had a tactically response space challenge. And instead of doing an open topic where anybody can come in and submit anything, and then you have evaluators who are typically volunteers, don't have the subject matter expertise, and they're coming in, may have 5 to review or they may have 20 to review. When they're doing these specific challenges, they host workshops where they're meeting with guardians, they're meeting with industry, they're meeting with academia, they're bringing them all in to define the problem sets and explore the realm of possibility. And then they're going out and posting a specific topic in, at the SBIR sit around. And instead of just doing 1 or 2 awards to that specific topic, they're doing up to 20 awards. So, looking at the digital spaceport of the future, they're obviously trying to figure out how the Space Force can digitize the existing infrastructure as well as building the new infrastructure started from a digital perspective rather than started from how we've the Department of Defense has been around for a long time. We're trying to look at new ways to start developing that infrastructure with a new force. So looking at those different focus areas that they're focusing these challenges on, I think that kind of gives some insight to where the Space Force is gonna, execute some of their future dollars. And as we look at, contested logistics, that, contested logistics is a very broad term, but it does cover the, not GPS denied environments, looking for those alternate position navigation timing. The Space Force still can play a huge role in that, but the Space Force isn't only looking at that from a space perspective. In their SpaceWorks challenge, they were open to ground-based position navigation timing solutions. They were open to maritime solutions. So, I think those are good to look at where the funding is going to go. And then, like I mentioned earlier, looking at those S&T budget and priorities, that really helps me kind of identify what the next few years are going to be looking like rather than just fiscal year 25. But when I am looking at FY25, that's where I go and look at the budget, and there's what's called justification books that each department posts. And you can go into those justification books, and they're broke out by the Department of Defense's colors of money. So you have operations and maintenance J books, you have RDT&E J books, and you have procurement, MilCon, MilPer. I'll typically focus on the RDT&E for a lot of our clients because that's the stage our clients are in. But I do also look at the operations and maintenance and the procurement J books, and I'll start going through and getting a little more targeted based on the portfolio that we have. I know what technologies our clients provide. I can go through these J books and start seeing which programs are focused on that, which are getting funding increases from FY24 to FY25, which ones have focus areas, specifically around the technologies our clients are developing or building out. So that's kind of how I look at it. But the AP&T, the digitizing, the AIML, those three are definitely high priority areas in the Space Force, but also across the DoD in my mind.
That's great insight. Jonathan or John, anything to add there? And I got another question to take us down another track here.
I would just add one of the things and benefits about the Space Force being a new military branch that still is, not even 5 years old yet, is that typically one of the hardest parts about working with the DoD is DoD procurement and just the cycles there. I think Space Force has been a little bit more innovative and nimble, and I think broadly speaking, the DoD is able to use Space Force in a way to potentially make it a little bit easier to do business with the DoD. An example of that is SDA, the Space Development Agency, which has really been tasked at partnering with early and emerging kind of critical technologies that are disruptive to space. We've had a number of our companies in our portfolio receive large contracts through SDA, and so we'll get into the minutia of what is the right kind of order and sequencing of contracts to focus on. But I think it's a great signal for Space Force being the smallest and newest of the DoD branches to have these new procurement on-ramps to make it easier for early stage startups to work with them.
Actually, you eased right into the question I wanted to ask Jonathan and John specifically. Nick gave us how he senses and sees and then matches with clients and their trajectory. But from your portfolios and the investing you've done and your lived experience watching your different companies succeed, falter, etc., what has been the winning pathway from a government contract standpoint, or what's
We may have lost TJ there, but I think the good news is John and I can pick it up from there. Look, I'll give a brief overview. What certainly I would say first is that not all government dollars are created equal. Again, as a venture capitalist, our interest is something that can be commercialized and scaled. And so what is the pathway into those subsequently larger follow-on opportunities? There's incredible DARPA R&D funding that's available as well too, but given that DARPA's mission is a little bit further out on the development curve than we tend to be, a lot of our companies aren't necessarily focused on going after DARPA dollars initially. That being said, DARPA offers great programs, and you certainly can use that as a way to subsidize development of your product and company before you approach venture capital. So there's no one right answer in terms of what to focus on. I would say for our companies, they typically have quickly gone through phase 1 and direct to phase 2 SBIRs. That typically has been anywhere from $750K to 1.2 or 1.8 million. per grant. That's been a great opportunity for them to accelerate development of their technology, especially if it's on the hardware side, or if it's on the software side, to be able to field an initial MVP and get some user traction from there. We've had companies then transition to a phase 3. Phase 3s can be a lot larger. We've had a company that has closed a phase 3 of up to $20 million. And so that is where you can really tie in a lot of the end user warfighter and some of the other contracting opportunities and vehicles that you've been building a coalition and a support ecosystem around, bring it back to phase 3. And so we've seen our companies do that successfully. We've seen our companies close OTAs. Maybe Nick can give us a bit of a rundown on kind of what's unique there. But from our perspective, OTAs are interesting because they can swell to much larger contract size. I think I've seen OTAs that have gone up to $1 billion. And OTAs cannot be contested by those that have won programs of record, is my understanding. And so you're typically not going to see some of the largest government contractors competing there. It's a mechanism that is meant for, hopefully enabling startups and kind of scaled companies to be able to compete and get dollars. So we've seen OTAs again that can scale quite nicely there. And then I would say the last kind of growing area is to always be aware of kind of new pockets, less about the contracting vehicle itself, but where it comes from. I think, John, you mentioned previously working at DIU for a little bit. Obviously, DIU is an increasingly important partner with some of their programs coming out. We've also seen the Office of Strategic Capital, which is a new initiative between the DoD and the SBA. They have been looking for non-recourse, loan type grants to give directly to critical and emerging technologies as well. So the good news is there's a lot of on-ramps. The challenge is maybe trying to figure out and plot the path. But I would say going all the way back, if you're at day 0 right now, really thinking about how can I close a phase 1 or direct to phase 2 to get a little bit of non-dilutive capital in and begin building the product.
Very cool. And sorry I skipped out there, but you picked up the ball quite well, dribbled succinctly to the basket. Yeah, John, Lockheed Martin Ventures as a strategic investor, you're a little bit different than a traditional VC. What have you seen that works really well from a contract vehicle, contract pathway progression for your portcos?
Yeah, I think Jonathan hit essentially what I would have said, so I won't repeat what he said. I mean, quickly, the bigger the better. I like the strat buys very well. I like the OTAs, and then work your way down to SBIRs. And I'll talk about SBIRs are great. It just wouldn't be my top choice, but they're great in the right situation. But what we would prefer to see is companies that are winning contracts with programs that have a demonstrated track record of moving you along the procurement cycle to a final program record. DIU uses OTAs. They're known for that. They're not the only ones. They've been around for a while. The SSC's SPEC program uses OTAs, but different organizations execute these better or worse. I think the DIU has demonstrated ability to get better and better at executing, and we see that their budgets increased substantially this year as a result of being able to execute on the money that they receive. So working with an organization that knows how to move you from development to prototype to production contracts and has the right networking connection, that's almost more important to me than that contract vehicle. If you happen to win a SBIR phase 1 with DIU doesn't do it, but say it was DIU, that would be significant. On the SBIR part, what we advise is SBIRs are great. The earliest you are, the more likely you are to need that development funding. We would just prefer that the SBIR be used to fund like an enhancement to your core technology than be the source of funding for your company and the core product line. So we're venture investors. We'd like you to be using our venture dollars to scale your core technology. And if there's something that's a little bit divergent that you think has an opportunity to go after a particular segment that's maybe not your core and what you've promised your investors you're going to use your money for, that's a good place to go after an SBIR to get a little bit of supplemental funding, take a little bit of a gamble on something that's potentially a little bit divergent. But what we don't like to see is SBIRs or any other contract that's distracting you from your core focus, from the core thing that we invested in you to do. Plans change, but we'd like to see our companies focused on the core of their mission. That's what I'll say about those.
That's a great point, and I'm thinking about all the folks I know here in Albuquerque and along that Space Valley corridor up through Colorado Springs, and they're in that phase 1 SBIR, maybe multiple phase 1s, and maybe a phase 2. But I've seen them be distracted. But there's also a kind of muscle memory of going after that to extend runway that 3-6 months. That's really, if you're there, that's not really where you want to be. It probably could take a bigger step back moment and ask yourself what do you want to be when you grow up, kind of thing, from a company perspective, right? Because it could get you in a loop, whether you've chosen it or not, or whether it's been proactive or not. Could get you in a loop where you are an R&D company, not a company bringing something to the market. Again, it's SBIR mill is a term, but I think it's more nuanced than that in terms of what's ideal versus where you do get funding and where you need to get funding to survive. So, but I like the way you talked about that, John, in the sense of use the VC money for that core, for that we're going to be best in the world here discipline. And if some non-dilutive funding comes along that augments that can be hung off of that platform, that can be good. But if it's way over here and it's really nothing to do here, nobody's gonna really, including yourself, appreciate the end result from that, even if it is, a good chunk of change.
Yeah, TJ, I
I
might.
could jump in there real quick. So
Yeah.
from a small business perspective and a VC perspective, the programs like the TACFI, which is a tactical funding increase, and the StratFi, which is a strategic funding increase, that's on the Air Force side. The Army has what they call their Army SBIR Catalyst, which is a similar program to the TACFI, StratFi, a little different. But like as VCs and small businesses are looking to work together, TACFI, StratFi, and Army SBIR Catalyst do offer opportunities for matching funds. So if you're getting matching funds, or if you're getting VC funds, the timing that you get that can be very critical to you getting those matching funds on that TACFI or StratFi program. So as you guys are, considering investments and when you're going to take those investments, it's definitely important to pay attention to the timelines, because that can hugely impact, your next step as you try to start graduating beyond a phase 2.
Yeah, I'd love to double down on what both Nick and John said there, because I completely agree. Some inside baseball in terms of how VCs think. It is not beneficial to you as a startup to close SBIRs just for the sake of it if it is not accretive to your product roadmap. It will actually go against the VC's perception of your ability to operate the company and stay focused if you're grabbing SBIRs that are wildly off track. So absolutely want to underscore that any phase 1 or direct phase 2 SBIR that you may be pursuing needs to be pretty tightly coupled with your product roadmap, and there needs to be kind of rationale behind that. In terms of the StratFi, TACFI, absolutely think it also can do 2 things. It can help you plus up your funding round in a way that allows you to raise more capital without diluting yourself more in those rounds. We have a company currently that is closing a $40 million round, but 20 million of it is coming from a matching vehicle like this. And so it allows the founders to raise 20 million in venture and match that with 20 million, through one of these vehicles. The other thing I would say is it also can be a great way to drive urgency with venture. As John knows, some of the biggest challenges sometimes with venture is timing of your rounds. And so if you can go to market, and obviously this is several steps down the road, you don't start with a StratFi, TACFI on your pre-seed. But if you're able to build that type of support internally, it can be a very valuable asset to bring to the venture community and say, I have $5, $10, $15 million in available matching funding. I'd like to raise 5, 10, 15 million to match that. That drives great urgency and interest from the venture community because they know their investment dollars will be stretched even further.
It's good stuff. I'm looking over my questions, but I wanted to get to some Q&A with the attendees here. Let's go to this last one here. And I think you just talked about this, Jonathan, and you talked about it, John, but the way that this is asked is interesting. So a company gets an SBIR grant. How easy or hard is it for investors to then write a check? what is your decision philosophy as VCs when you see that SBIR grant? Can you re-articulate what you've said with that question in mind?
Take a shot. So I'm looking at a company that just won one for prospective investment. It's an SBIR. So if it's a phase 1 or phase 2, if that is kind of what they are using as the traction that is warranting investment, I would expect them to be an early stage company or early stage pre-seed or seed. Series A, I would not. If you showed me that you're one at SBIR and that's why you're rate, that's a justification for an A, not going to work. So yeah, so if it's a pre-seed, then yeah, that's impressive because you're a couple people, you have virtually no money, you want an SBR, they think your technology is attractive. That might get me interested. Phase 2 for a seed stage company, similarly. So it's not going to tip the scales because it's still really small, but I think it's a validation that you have some customers looking at you with a path to commercial traction. Now, we're a dual use investor, so I'm still going to be looking for you to have a commercial path to a commercial market. That's a path to a government market. So it's maybe half of the puzzle for me at an investment.
I would just add, we rarely look at SBIRs as validation for why we should make an investment. But unfortunately, I would say if companies have, early stage companies have been unable to win or get SBIRs closed, that can actually act more as probably a red flag in terms of ability to navigate DoD procurement early. I would also say, every venture firm is different, so I can only speak to our strategy. We are highly concentrated investors, which means we only make 4, maybe 5 investments per year. Because of that, that means we have, unfortunately, a really high ratio of companies that we have to say no to, or now's not the right time. And so because of that, our calculus on SBIRs are, it is kind of the expectation that companies have been able to or will quickly be able to navigate and close those first 1 or 2 steps. I think the larger opportunity that we're more focused and excited on, I think to John's earlier comment, is really scaling into OTAs through a variety of different mechanisms, and then really jumping into strat-fis and TAC-fis to match a Series A type round. I think, a founder's demonstrated ability to do that or having been able to do that in the past certainly resonates with a firm like ours.
Jonathan, I'm going to stick with you on this next question. This is a good one, and it's probably helpful for the founders along the lines of your statement that you only make 4 or 5. So you have a certain kind of mindset and approach that founders need to be aware of. How do you get in front of startups? How do startups get in front of you? Conferences, social media, Google searches. As a startup, I'm looking to attract instead of only chasing my investors. So maybe you and John could both comment on that one. How are you seeing deals, and what's best?
The honest answer is, always. So we receive tons of inbound from the website, cold emails, Twitter DMs, LinkedIn inbox. Like I receive it in every mechanism. Our portfolio companies, if a founder of our portfolio company introduces another founder, there's generally a pretty strong chance that we'll take that meeting as well too. So that's always a great mechanism to get in front of venture. We have other VCs that will meet a company and maybe they don't invest in space or they don't invest as early as we do. They may introduce us. And then I would also say, for a firm like ours where we are investing so early, we also tend to spend time with entrepreneurs and founders technically before they've started the company or just very early in the idea process. And so, if you are a first-time founder or if you're early in your journey, one of the things I would consider doing is trying to build a relationship and a network of VCs that have been a sounding board to you before you're looking to raise. Obviously, it's easier said than done, but the classic trope about ask for advice and you'll get funding and ask for funding and you'll get advice, sometimes can be true for first-time founders in terms of how they operate their funding fundraise process. And so if you've never raised venture capital before, if this is your first startup, I think what's most important first is just to develop a bit of a relationship with a handful of investors that are in and around the category, share the idea of what you're working on with them, talk to them openly and transparently about the opportunities you see, some of the challenge sets you foresee, go execute on that, and then circle back. One of the best things I love is an honest, transparent founder who kind of over time says what they're going to go do, does it, we reflect on it together, and you kind of build trust over a period of time versus if we just meet a founder in a 7 or 14-day fundraising window, it's much harder for both of us to make a determination on if this is a good mutual match. So long way of saying, we get in front of founders and we connect with founders in all variety of manners, but in terms of the timing in which we connect with founders, earlier the better, is generally, the advice in my playbook.
And there is such thing as a Las Vegas shotgun wedding, but most of the time you're going to be dating for a while. You're going to be building a relationship. You're going to see each other at the picnic. This is always hard advice to hear from a founder's perspective when I'm under the gun to, be in that that fundraising cycle now. But the corollary to it is build relationship now, knowing that if you pitch Jonathan after this webinar, you get on a Zoom with him, and he's like, not now. You have just started actually forming a relationship with Jonathan that 2 years from now might be great for either this same startup or another startup, or you might be able to make an introduction to somebody that you care about that needs funding. And it's a much bigger picture thing to build relationships in the world than to seek a transactional kind of engagement. But again, I totally empathize with the fact that that's hard to hear for that person who's maybe been technical, especially, and they've got all the technology there, but that investor network continues to be elusive, or they just haven't built it, right? And you're telling me I need to go spend 1 or 2 years drinking lots of coffee and go into things, and that can be tough. But at the same time, that the other kind of corollary lesson to take away here is this is why it's important to build team. You can build team in a way that you give the right person the right equity who has those relationships. That is of immense value. Of somebody who has that trust already built up, adding them to your team can get you there quicker, with the trade-off of the fact that you're going to have to give something up to do that. So John, anything to add on this in this regard? This is a topic I like to talk about a lot, but I'll stop.
Quickly, the majority of the leads are inbound versus outbound. The ones that I go after are going to be ones that I'm pretty serious about pursuing. So, and so to be a strong inbound, referrals are best for us. Cold inbounds, a referral from someone that's trusted, that knows how Lockheed Ventures operates and what we look for is the best, because they will have pre-vetted it and they understand the types of things we're going after and why. So those are the strongest ones. So I guess if you don't have that, you can certainly figure out Lockheed Venture investors in their network. You can figure out who we've invested in, and certainly influential people at the corporation that we may trust. And you might consider seeing if those folks are in your network, explain to them what they're doing, get a little bit of a pre-read on it. That's if you want to do your homework and encourage it. We may still take cold inbound, and we do meetings all the time, but those are gonna be the strongest ones that we want to take a look at.
TJ, I would just add to this last question, because I do certainly empathize with founders early on, kind of thinking about the fundraising journey. Before I started this venture firm, I was a founder for 10 years, and so certainly spent a lot of time on the other side of the table. What I would say is, venture financing is just one vehicle for scaling your company, and it doesn't need to be the first either. And so, leverage strategic angel investors, leverage accelerators that also give, small grants or financing. Obviously, there are the Y Combinators and there's the Techstars Space of the world, but there's also other space-oriented accelerators, Starburst, Aerospace, Seraphim. And so there are other opportunities out there where, the expectation doesn't have to be to raise from venture on day zero, especially if you're a technical founder, you don't have those relationships. That's totally fine. It's just a slightly different path. So I would encourage you to think about, applying or looking at some of those accelerator programs that might give you 100K, 200K. You might be able to raise some angel investment, up to 500K. And so now you've got a little bit of runway. You can pay yourself, you can bootstrap. Maybe that gives you the runway to close a phase 1 SBIR, and then start to build those venture relationships, in parallel as you look to raise your first million or $1.5 million in venture. So there's no one right answer, but I would just lean into, to John's point, the best approach is having a warm relationship, a warm inbound. And so building those relationships over time, if you don't have them on day zero, can be quite helpful.
Yeah, that's great. And except Jaya or Yaya, I can't figure out how I pronounce your name, so pardon me, but that kind of goes to the question there. Any conferences or events you would recommend for a brand new startup where we could start making our introductions and network with the VC community? An accelerator is a corollary for accelerating relationships with VCs. Any other events or sources for socialization that you all like to start those warm introductions?
Space Symposium is generally one of the ones where I see a bunch of the investors, our portfolio companies, new startups there. That's in Colorado Spring in April typically. So Symposium is great. Payload Space also holds a space investors event. I actually just saw that they announced their one for this year. It's in November in LA. That might be a great event as well. And then, to be honest, it depends a little bit on what your product set is. Or should you go more towards the geospatial conferences? Should you go towards more of a small sat? Should you go to more of the defense-oriented conferences? I would find the path that fits for you depending on what you're building. But those are certainly ones that I've been to, and I know other VCs have gone to.
Cool.
Yeah, Space Symposium, satellite in DC. There's one in Mountain View. There's one in Utah. The bigger the conference, probably the better. When I go to these, unless I'm presenting, I'm really there walking around the startup booths or just meeting founders that happen to be traveling there because it's a good venue to catch a bunch of people at one time. Half the time, I'm not even in the exhibit room. I'm out in the coffee area just taking meetings, just because it happened to be a place where everyone convened. So those big events, and then you can see certainly on LinkedIn when people say, hey, I'm going to be there, you'll be able to get a good handle on the investors that are going to be attending, and then talk to the investors you expect might be attending. There's a decent chance they'll be at one of the big ones like that.
Really cool. Pulling out one little word of wisdom from what you were just saying, John, is that networking as a skill set is very important. Signing up, paying big money to go to Space Symposium and then expecting the agenda to put you in front of people, that it's not going to work. It's really the logistics of many people at once that is the value, but you've got to create your own conference in a sense to say, what should I do? So again, if you're not strong on networking skills, obviously this if you are, but if you're not strong in networking skills, it can feel like a little bit of a cheat. Like, I'm supposed to go to this conference, where's all my VCs? And you got to realize you got to do that work to go make sure that you get on John's calendar for the coffee in the hallway. And it's the way it is, right? I want to end with one question, which is a kind of open topic question. What's advice you would give with respect to those seeking government contracts? A tidbit, whether it's something orthogonal to our conversation so far, or just something you really want to emphasize that I haven't asked you about yet. Nick, we'll go to you, put you on the spot a little bit, but your parting words or piece of advice for our founders here specifically around government contracts and the one takeaway you'd want them to have.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'll say about working with the government is it's not fast, it's not efficient. Like it takes dedication, it takes time, it takes work. I mean, you have to be prepared coming into this to put in a lot of effort. And you're not going to have a $10 million order in 2 months if you're coming in cold to the government. There's programs like SBIR and SITR out there that help you get the foot in the door. Unfortunately, like with the with the Department of the Air Force, the transition to phase 3s is incredibly low, and that's because they just take whatever opportunities they can find. They're willing to listen to the government, but there's not a transition strategy in place. So the Navy's much better at that. The Navy typically has program offices lined up behind their programs before they even release a topic. But if you're going through the AFWorks, the SpaceWorks open topics, just be very diligent and strategic in who your customer is and start having those discussions very early, because you can get a phase 2 18-month period of performance and you'll be doing great, you're meeting all your milestones, but if you don't start the funding discussions 18 months in advance of the end of that period of performance, you pretty much just added at least a 1 to 2 year cycle just to even start getting some funding. So, like SBIRs and SITRs are a great tool, but they are a means to an end. They are not the end. So you need to start having those discussions with those customers to understand their funding cycles, their acquisition cycles, what funding is available. And the earlier you start those discussions and the earlier you can start bringing the stakeholders in that have the decision-making authority, the influence, the funding, understand what contracted vehicles are available, that's crucial to your success long-term, because your TPOC most likely is not playing in that world. They're technical, they're experts in their field, but they don't understand the government acquisition or the funding cycles. So getting the right stakeholders involved early is just crucial to your long-term success, and not getting stuck in that SBIR, just revolving door of one SBIR after another, basically. So getting the right stakeholders is just crucial.
Wise words from Nick Kyle. Thanks for joining us today. John, final words from you.
I've helped some companies recently negotiate their government contracts, and more so their commercial contracts. I advise them to take risk on the milestone payments and try and front load that as much as possible, get cash in the door early, especially if you need to buy inventory. Don't let the customer, even if it's a government customer, try to get payment up front, either certainly on deliverable, payment up front for inventory purchases. Front load, get cash in the door, keep yourself alive. That's kind of what I advise on contracts.
It's good advice for all of life. Jonathan, last words from you.
Yeah, this is advice that I would give to founders broadly, regardless of what you're building, software or hardware, in the space domain or outside. Life is always easier when you focus on solving a top 2 or 3 problem set for a customer. If you're building something that they have urgent pain and have appropriated budget for, it allows you to generally try and move a little bit quicker and be in front of larger pockets of capital, both commercially and within the DoD. So how that translates to space companies, I would really think about, if you're at ideation stage, what are the largest programs that the Space Force has stated, whether it's tactically responsive space, space domain awareness, SATCOM interoperability, cybersecurity, alternative PNT. These are clear areas of need that the Space Force has stated. And so if you're in the idea phase, think about, what are the gaps in those, commercial capabilities, and where can you maybe build and kind of innovate? Or if you're building something outside of that, think about how your technology, hardware, software, again, relates to these different domains and categories, because ultimately you want to be working on something that's attached to kind of the most important, largest programs within the Space Force, so that you can scale and have a chance of success. So I would encourage everyone to really think about mapping their technology to the largest problem sets that the Space Force and other warfighters are tasked with day in and day out.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you so much for being our special guest today. May we have you on in future editions of our quarterly Investing Entrepreneur's Guide to Space Investing. It was great to have you. Thank you, everybody who stuck around with us and asked some great questions. Didn't get to all your questions, but certainly hit us up via the event information and things like that. And Kelly, as a connector as she is, will make sure we route any lingering questions. But Kelly, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. It was amazing. As usual, you guys are awesome. Appreciate you being here. Especially love to talk about building relationships and things like that. I feel like it's those soft skills, those things that really are key. So great to have you. And so if you enjoyed this, we will have a recording on our YouTube channel. You can forward it, you can watch it again. You can, go back and review things that you maybe have missed the first time. We did put that link in the chat. So go there, subscribe, like, do all those things. Our next program will be actually next week. We're kind of off of our schedule. We'll be going back to our schedule next week. And that'll be on Thursday at 10 Mountain Time. And it is the University Government Partnerships webinar. We will have 11 government agencies on, and they're going to go rapid fire through all of the opportunities. It's going to be mind blowing, and you're going to want to go back to that recording as well. So ahead and follow that link that we posted if you want to go sign up for that. And other than that, you guys are amazing and I appreciate you being here. Always here if you have questions or if you have ideas for future webinars, please let me know. There's sponsorship opportunities too. So just don't hesitate to reach out. Anyway, thank you all. It's 11 o'clock. I'll let you all go. And it's been wonderful. See you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.